C'est bon. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à cette deuxième journée de l'audience publique d'experts de la Commission sur l'éducation à la petite enfance. Alors, cette deuxième journée va nous permettre d'entendre 6 experts, dont 5 sont de l'extérieur de Montréal aujourd'hui. Alors, nous en avons entendu 10 hier. Nous en entendrons 6 aujourd'hui. La particularité de cette journée-ci, c'est que la majorité des présentations, sauf une, se fait par vidéoconférence. Alors, voici comment ça va se dérouler. Au début de chaque présentation, il y a un battement de 10-15 minutes entre chacun des individus qui va servir à assurer la connexion. Donc, la première présentation de Mme Susan Prentice, qui est professeure de sociologie à l'Université du Manitoba, c'est prévu pour 9h15. Donc, vers 9h, Mme Prentice va se connecter, puis on va s'assurer que tout fonctionne bien avant de l'entendre. Donc, les gens dans la salle et les gens qui nous écoutent en direct, je vous invite à faire preuve de compréhension pour ces laps de temps là, qui vont séparer chacune des présentations. Nous allons essayer que ce soit le plus fluide possible, mais donc, c'est ça. Alors, si jamais la connexion Internet nous fait défaut pour une raison ou pour une autre, nous allons appeler les présentateurs et procéder par téléphone. On espère qu'on n'aura pas à fonctionner de cette façon-là parce que ça va nous empêcher de voir leur présentation. Par contre, de toute façon, les présentations seront rendues publiques sur le site Internet de la Commission dans les meilleurs délais. Donc, vous pourrez donc entendre au minimum leur présentation, puis aller voir par la suite leurs documents de référence. Par contre, si on est par téléphone, la web diffusion ne fonctionnera pas. Donc, les gens qui sont à distance, c'est ça. Ça ne fonctionnera pas ou ce sera de mauvaise qualité? Ce sera de mauvaise qualité. Donc, ça va fonctionner, mais ce sera de mauvaise qualité. Alors, on espère que la technologie va bien fonctionner, mais on a tout mis en place pour que, normalement, tout fonctionne très bien. Alors, voilà, maintenant, on va tout simplement attendre en attendant que Mme Prentice se connecte. I'm going to say a few words in English in case some of our audience on the internet is English speaking. So today's public hearing with experts, we will be hearing 6 new person who will mostly do their presentation in English. So this is how it's going to work. Each person has a 15-minute presentation time, which will be followed by a 15 minutes question and answer from the commission members here. If they don't use up the entire question period, we might take a few questions from the audience here in Montreal. We kindly asked that you are understanding if the technology fails us. If it does, we will call the presentators by phone. So we hope that we don't get there, but that's how it's going to work if it's necessary. So we'll just wait till the first person gets connected, and we will first try to make sure that the connection is solid and is working well, and then we will hear their presentation. So there's about a 15-minute time of technology assessment in between each presentation. Bonjour. Hi. We see you very well. We don't hear you at the moment, though, so we'll be making some tests. Can you speak?
I am speaking.
Oh, we hear you now. Okay, so the sound, can you speak just a little more so we make sure that the sound is right?
Yes, bonjour. Je suis ravie d'assister.
Okay.
Heureusement, vous, je parlerai en anglais et en français.
D'accord. Est-ce que quelqu'un dans la salle peut fermer les lumières pour que les gens dans le public voient un peu mieux au tableau?
My challenge is to share my screen with you.
Okay, so it's very simple. Technically, you just press plus. There's a little plus sign.
I see it.
So we can make the test. Have you share your screen?
Yes, start. Okay.
Okay, so now you shared your entire screen. Technically, you should be able to share only one window, but...
Okay, well, I've just...
Wonderful. We see it very well now. C'est parfait. Okay. So, yeah, so the sound is fine. So just a few words of introduction. First of all, Susan Prentice, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We are hoping that the technology will not fail us. If it does, we will call you back. First, we'll try calling back on Skype. If for some reason the internet connection is not working properly, we'll call on the phone. We have your phone number. Just as a reminder, this is the Commission on Early Childhood Education in Quebec. The objective of this commission is to make an assessment of early childhood education in Quebec, and the commission members have the mandate to make recommendations in terms of public policy to forging a collective vision of early childhood education's future in our province. This commission is an initiative of the Association québécoise des centres de la petite enfance, AQCPE. And to ensure the Commission's neutrality, they've asked those 3 Commission members to ensure that the Commission is independent and non-partisan. I'll just introduce them to you. The chair here is André Lebon. Martine Desjardins.
Bonjour.
And Pierre Landry. So I'm not going to present them in more length, but you can access their full biography on our website. The role of the Institut du Nouveau Monde, the organization for which I work, is to ensure the neutrality of the facilitation of the process and to provide to supervise operations. The objective now of this activity, the public hearing with expert, which we started yesterday, is to inform the Commission members of the most recent research results in terms of early childhood education. And this before they go on, because they will be touring the province of Quebec in the next 2 months, to meet with groups and citizens and hear out their points of view. So that's for the objective of today. And so yes, any question? That's fine. Okay. So I think we can start as you're ready. So we'll be hearing out your presentation, and so you have 15 minutes. If you go in too much length, I'm just gonna hand up this little paper here to say that there's 2 minutes left, and then to ask to conclude.
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you. So here we go.
All right. C'est parti. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to get to speak to you, and I'd like to congratulate you on taking on the commission, which I think will produce very important information for you in Quebec, but also for those of us outside of Quebec who have been very inspired by the revolution, really, which you launched more than 20 years ago. So I've organized my talk by the 4 or 5 questions that you gave me, and I'll concentrate more on some aspects of the questions than on others. The opening question asked me to consider equality of chances. And I have to turn into a sociologist and speak to you about the very important difference between equality of opportunities and equalities of outcomes. Because I would like you to think about this very much as you do your work. It's the difference between what you could think of as formal and substantive equality. I imagine you're familiar with Anatole France's very famous explanation of the law, right? Which forbids the rich as well as the poor from sleeping under bridges. The rich don't need to be forbidden from sleeping under bridges, right? So you can have laws which look neutral and policies which seem neutral and like they affect everybody, but they can actually get in, not just not produce equality of outcome, they can actually harm equality of outcome. So I would like you to think very carefully about these distinctions. And one of the things I will stress in my presentation to you is the importance of thinking about childcare policy at a system level, not only at the level of a childcare program. And this is, again, because sociology teaches us that systems have unique properties. It's not just 1 + 1 + 1 is 3. For the same way that you don't understand a whole army just by understanding soldiers, or a whole economy just by looking at workers, I'm going to insist on the fact that you need to think about the childcare policy framework at the largest level. And this may be different from the way many other of your experts will encourage you to think. So with the goal not of equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome in mind, I would recommend that you promote universal access. And in a few minutes, I'll speak to that directly. This means that at its heart, the role of the state is essential. It will provide the regulatory framework. It will organize funding. It will coordinate research and evaluation. It will manage the system ideally, and I would suggest public delivery, which perhaps is something we can talk about. And what you need to be doing very explicitly is creating a system, not only a collection of services. This will be essential for making quality. So when we think about quality in early childhood education, you can think of it again at 2 levels: process quality and structural quality. Process quality would be, for example, if you were an observer, you attend a program, you watch what happens on the floor, you watch the interactions with children, you look at it at the micro scale. But in almost always, good process quality depends on good structural quality. So for example, you could imagine a high quality program being offered even in the absence of public funding by people who worked heroically, but in the absence of good funding, it's very unlikely that there will be consistently high process quality. So I would encourage you to be thinking about quality at the system level, in addition to what we would say in English, on the floor. And I would argue, in fact, that strong public policy is the basis and foundation for high process quality. So, you know, your ITERs and ECHRs and quality scores, which average out at mediocre or somewhat higher or somewhat lower, which are pretty typical across Canada. The primary way to increase those scores will be to work on public policy decisions and increasing structural quality. You might be familiar with it already, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about the 8 elements that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has stressed. These are their lessons for building structural quality. So in 2006, so 10 years ago now, the OECD suggested these were the 8 elements for building strong process and structural quality in childcare. The first and most important, in their view, is an integrated approach to early education and care, which means not fragmenting it across multiple ministries. It's one of the questions you have. Okay. All good? Thank you. A strong and equal partnership with the education system. I realize that your mandate stops with children once they enter school, but I would encourage you to not forget school-age children. A universal approach to access, and as they've explained, particular attention to children in need of additional supports. Substantial public investment in services and infrastructure, and this has included the widely used benchmark of a minimum expenditure of 1% of the GDP. I believe that Quebec spends that, but I actually could not tell you. Mr. Fortin might have explained that yesterday. Number 5 is a participatory approach to quality improvement, so partnerships with people working in the system, good training, and then 7 and 8, in a way, are working on what your commission is asking, right? How do you collect data? How do you monitor? What is an agenda for research and evaluation? So these are the 8 elements. And you will notice that, for example, ratios or group sizes are not there. Should it be a 1, a 2, or a 3-year training degree? It's not there. These are larger macro level questions to be addressed. The process quality that I'm sure will be of high interest to you is important, but the OECD says start with these 8 elements first. So on to the question of accessibility. I would say that education, ECE, is a child's right, like education is. But in my own work and in the work of many other experts, we will introduce additional rights-based claims. And I would encourage you to do this. In particular, I would encourage you to think about the importance of ECE for women's rights and for family accommodation, which has been important elements of human rights law outside of Quebec. In terms of accessibility, you may know that in 2002 and again in 2013, the European Union affirmed what it calls the Barcelona targets. These could be interesting for Quebec. The reason is that to remove disincentives to women's labor force participation, they need to be providing childcare to at least 90% of children between 3 years of age and school age, and at least 33% of younger children. And when the European Union speaks about why childcare is necessary, it starts with children's rights, but it will add these other arguments: gender equality, increasing women's employment to grow the economy, combating poverty and social exclusion, increasing social cohesion, increasing children's school success, and at the same time, combating early school leaving, responding to demographic changes and to population aging. So this is a large package of social objectives that can be met by good childcare services, in addition to supporting children. And I think the arguments are stronger when we make these as a package. So you asked me to speak about financing questions. Before that, you asked me to speak about universality. And a question you posed is whether we should be thinking about universality versus proportionate universality. And I would suggest this is a false choice. A fully accessible and universal system will respond to the needs of disproportionately disadvantaged families. I think starting a system with the objective of proportionate universality does not get you all the way to universality. So I would aim high rather than low. On parent fees, I am in a minority among my peers here, but I believe that parents should not pay when they walk in the door of their childcare center. I think that early childhood education services like education or healthcare should be paid for collectively through progressive taxation, not at the door. This may be a hard sell in the current political and fiscal climate. So since you've asked me to advise you, I would argue that you should be fighting very hard for the restoration of the $7 a day fee. And if that is unsellable, to set a cap on family income of perhaps 5 to 10%, with provisions for the most economically vulnerable households. 10% was the figure recently used in Manitoba by our expert commission, which has just reported. If you have not seen the Manitoba report, I would be pleased to send it to you. You will remember, I'm sure, that Monsieur Fortin has discovered that even at $7 a day, the Quebec system was, as he put it, rentable. So you certainly have a strong economic case to be made, even with very, very low fees. On financing, and I think this is my last slide, I would encourage you to not ask the question, should the system be funded through tax credits or through subsidies? I think that a better way to approach funding is to directly be funding the services. That would be what economists call supply side funding. And with stable supply side funding, quality goes up and affordability for parents goes up. And the European Union has argued that direct public financing, here supply side funding, with or without parent fees, makes better economies of scale, better quality at the national level, more efficient training and teaching of staff, and fairer pay and access. So my final point, and I think that will be my 15 minutes. In the end, I would say there should be no role for the private sector in Quebec. It's an essential public service. I would be encouraging you to be reducing and eventually eliminating all public funding for for-profit services. And I would encourage you to think about something that often goes unaddressed. And that is when there is a substantial commercial sector playing in a social service field. They play a political role. And in particular, they play a role in trying to create conditions of profitability. And that tends to mean wanting to attack regulations and standards, which are essential for quality. It makes perfect sense as a business person to want to produce a lower and lower floor. It creates more profitability. But this runs the logic of this runs exactly opposite to high process quality and high structural quality. In the interim, while there is a substantial for-profit sector, I would strongly be urging that both the for-profit and the not-for-profit CPEs are held to the same standards, staffing ratios, quality, training, and group size. I have sent you in my PowerPoint some references that you might want to read. I'm sure you will be very busy. I could also add to that list the Manitoba Commission that has just been completed. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Susan, for this presentation. You also spoke very slowly and clearly, which I believe was much appreciated by everyone here whose English is a second language. So thank you very much. We've noted, we will go look at the Manitoba Commission. Any other reference will be welcome. I now turn to the Commission members for a period of questions.
I have maybe, it's Pierre Landry talking. I would have a clarification question with regards to when you are mentioning that, okay, I'm just lost here in my note. Yeah, that will be. Yeah. Create a system, not only a collection of services. Could you please elaborate on this so it's clear in my mind?
Yes. This is the distinction that I was trying to draw between process quality and structural quality. Very often, the temptation is to think of a child care center as though it stands in isolation, and to only think about what the program looks like for the children in that one facility. And from this very narrow and constricted point of view, people will say, oh, look, for example, a commercial center can offer the same quality as a not-for-profit center. And yet, from the larger perspective of public policy, for example, if funding is going into commercial centers, we know that some of that money is going to profits. And we know that the commercial sector at a larger level will be playing a lobbying role. This happens in every sector. So while it is true that on the floor, two programs side by side, the experiences of children might look maybe close to equal, from a perspective of a system, right, you have introduced complexities that could be erased. So when child care policy is only thought of as though you take care of what is on the floor and everything else will take care of itself, then you've just produced a collection of services and not a system. Every organized system needs intermediate levels of scale. There's a dynamic to a collectivity. For example, if you, in my business, we would call this methodological individualism, to only just look at the smallest unit and not see how they come together. When I try to introduce this concept in my classes, I ask my students to think about water. Water is just hydrogen and oxygen. And yet water has properties that neither hydrogen nor oxygen have alone. It can freeze, it can boil, right? It can be steam. The molecules of hydrogen and oxygen can't do that. And a system also has properties of its own as a system. And so structural quality, I will argue for you, is the precondition to good process quality.
Good morning, Madame. André Lebon. Thank you for bringing us at the system level. And am I wrong, or am I okay if I would say that you consider early childhood education as the same as the education issues. It's part of it, and you look at it on the same basis. It's a state responsibility. It should be free, as the education system is, and it should be accessible for, I would say, more of the people than less. So, am I right? So that's why, and when I see the 8 criteria of OECD, when I see the work of Atkinson Center when they do their survey about early childhood, I know that you put big emphasis on the fact that there's one leader, and the leader more of the time is education ministry. Can you tell us more about this coherence, please?
Well, the coherence is more an aspiration than a reality. It's the second item in the OECD's list. They say a strong and equal partnership. In Manitoba, it's been 125 years of public education. 125 years ago, we turned individual one-room schoolhouses across our flat province into a system. We have not yet fully done that for childcare, but the model of education, I think, provides the most promising path for a range of reasons. It requires, however, some big changes in the system of education itself to welcome a strong and equal partnership. These the status and size and institutional history of education and ECE are very different. So it's an aspiration that there should be this strong and equal partnership. The history all across Canada is that ECE services began in welfare portfolios, right, for the needy, the strange, as a public good for everybody. This is a historical fact. It's a legacy of attitudes to children and to the family. If I could go back 150 years, I would change our history. But it means that today we have a big challenge in creating a public understanding that early childhood is as essential as public education was to build, I would say, nation building, to build equality for children and for families, and to do that long list of positive things that the Barcelona targets talked about: social cohesion, social solidarity, stronger economies, and the rest. Is that a satisfactory answer?
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I will prefer the fact that you made our universality versus proportionate universality a false choice to ask you a question between, should we establish, for example, a priority between accessibility versus quality? Because a lot of experts yesterday told that quality should be our prior target, for example, and we should, in the long term, preserve accessibility. So do you have an opinion on that?
Oh, this is a very tough question. This is a bit like, would you like to die by drowning or by fire? Well, here would be my best answer. I would promote accessibility and access, and then I would build quality later if I had to make that terrible choice of drowning or burning. And this is because I am pragmatic, And if children are not in licensed and regulated ECE settings, they will be in unregulating settings, which have the risk of being more dangerous for them and for their families. I think, for example, of Manitoba, back in 1890, when we had little one-room schoolhouses across my province, and if people had said, oh, we can't build an education system until the quality of every school is as high as it could be, we could not have acted. I think the historical path of every public service is it starts and it grows, and it gets better and bigger in a kind of a iterative way. And I would say that when there are more people accessing services, pressure grows as the system grows to increase quality. But like I said, to ask the question that way is a bit like saying, which way do you want to die?
Maybe a clarification with regards to Mr. Lebon's question, because the OECD is, the second point is talking about an equal partnership with education.
Yes.
In my mind, that means an independent, either ministry or department taking care of ECE and another one taking care of education. Would you be more of the opinion that it should be just one or two different bodies looking after the ECE programs?
I think that is a question that can best be answered by experts in your province. I think partnership as a goal can be achieved by a number of institutional arrangements. I do think, though, that when the education services and ECE services are seen as having different mandates and objectives, they often then are treated as silos. So I think that strategically it's often better when they are combined, or would be better if they could be combined. In the English language world, we call this the split system of education and care. But I could imagine partnerships that were equal, where legislative authority was in two different ministries or two different departments. The key for me here would be this strong and equal partnership, however that were achieved.
Okay, there's no further questions from the commission members here. In the audience, would anyone like to ask a question to Susan Prentice? Yes. So here we go, Mr. Pierre Fortin.
Thank you so much, Susan. Especially thank you for your good words toward our group, Sherbrooke and UQAM. My question is the following. You're keenly aware that the question of educational childcare came up during the last federal election, and that there was a plan put forward by the electoral platform of the NDP party, but that the new government, the Liberal government, unfortunately it was, in my view, too much politicized. You shouldn't politicize children. But anyway, the new government has made its bed into this wider child benefit system, which is totally opposed at the other end of family policy, in the sense that you're essentially throwing out money to families, which would have the consequence of, to some extent, immobilizing women and mothers in their houses, because having more money, there's less incentive to go to work. So why do you think this happened? One, and two, do you see any practical possibility of reversing this trend and bringing it back toward the kind of early childhood education and care system that you have in mind?
Okay. Well, good morning, Pierre. It's an important question. I will answer it in two different ways. I'm actually quite supportive of a family allowance. I do think that families need cash infusions, so I'm not opposed to them. I think it was regrettable that they got killed off in the 90s. But that said, we are more than consumers, and there are very few things that we can buy that are public goods just through cash by a check in the mail. We don't give every Canadian cash and say, go build your own roads, right? Or here's cash, good luck taking care of your fire and police protection, right? We do these things collectively because there are economies of scale. So I think the federal government opted to make the tax credit changes that they have because it's an instrument that's readily available to them and it is popular. But what I would introduce, which you did not raise, is that the Trudeau government promised within 100 days to start negotiations for a federal framework on early childhood care and education. Monsieur Jean-Yves Duclos and Carolyn Bennett have this portfolio, and we have heard across Canada that they are working on developing a federal framework. The rumors are that it will propose bilateral agreements, again with provinces, much like the Martin Plan of 2005. So I actually am very much looking with interest to see what the federal government does in these negotiations and what they propose to provinces. I think that it will be a shame if it's all bilateral agreements and there's no core principles across the country. I think that's a kind of fragmentation. But I think it will need to respect provincial realities. It will be intriguing to see how Quebec negotiates in this, how that plays out. But it is possible that this process will produce a national role for the Ottawa government in the development of services, not just cash to families. I have not yet been disappointed because they haven't produced anything. We will have to wait and see.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fortin. Thanking you also for your answer. Any other question from the audience? No. Well, thank you very much, Susan. We much appreciated your presentation. So you will be kept informed of our work and the report of the commission members.
Thank you very much. I wish you very good luck in your important work.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Donc, nous allons maintenant prendre une petite pause en attendant que le prochain présentateur se connecte. Il s'agit de Gordon Cleveland, qui est professeur associé à l'Université de Toronto au département d'administration. Donc, on se retrouve dans quelques minutes.
On n'a pas sa présentation. Ouais, sur Dropbox, je pense, sa présentation. Ouais. Ouais.
Elle était déjà dans votre pochette.
Ah, OK.
Normalement.
C'est bon.
J'avoue que c'est... Moi, je suis comme la balle.
Ouais, mais c'est trop facile. Et moi, j'ai passé mon enfance, j'ai passé mon adolescence dans un collège classique, sur le lien du dortoir. Je ne peux pas te demander, mais il y a bon là-dessus.
fait avoir.
Ouais.
C'est pas possible, hein?
Non. Bon. Elle est
vraiment
très
intéressant.
affirmative. Tu sais, je
En
veux
fait,
dire,
il y a
c'est
pas
un
de-
enjeu d'État. Non, non, mais c'est parce
Ouais.
que tout son concept se tient.
Ouais.
C'est une responsabilité collective comme l'éducation. Ben, écoute, pas loin pas loin d'être une bonne idée.
Ouais, non, c'est clair.
Il faut que ce soit mené par l'État. Si tu le considères, tu sais, elle dit qu'il faut que ce soit un positionnement, ce que je comprenais, que ce soit une politique publique, que ce soit un énoncé de
Parce
principe.
qu'apparemment, même, tu sais, la place du gouvernement est aussi de vendre les faire, tu sais,
Exactement. Puis c'est pour ça qu'après ça, elle met moins d'énergie sur les enjeux de qualité micro. Parce qu'elle dit, si tu as ce positionnement-là de base, bon positionnement de dire on soutient, la qualité devrait suivre. Mais j'ai failli, ça m'a tenté beaucoup. Je pensais à la phrase de lui, dans le on va garder les opinions pour nous, mais au Québec, le gouvernement actuel, il reste que c'est le développement de la place en commercial. Ce qui ne fait pas partie de ses principes.
ça a une définition d'accessibilité, on rentre pas tant dans ces endroits-là, elle est très claire là-dessus.
C'est mieux d'augmenter l'accessibilité.
Oui, quand elle
En
disait
fait, ça
ça,
rentrerait un peu dans le code.
Pour après ça créer un lieu qu'on peut
une pression.
pour créer une pression, parce que là, ça existe. Là, les gens, après ça, vont
Ben,
Ben, c'est pour ça
tu
que
peux plus le lancer.
c'est pour ça
Parce qu'on
que.
sait plus ta affaire, là, dans le temps.
Oui, mais en
moi,
même
c'est
temps, elle
pas-
dit qu'il ne devrait pas avoir de privé.
Non,
Non,
exact.
mais c'est
Mais
comme
moi, je
ça.
trouve que c'est une bonne question, parce que, tu sais, on a dit, je ferais l'accessibilité dans un qualité. On en a une qui s'arrête pour dire, mes parents sont très mauvais pour essayer de la
Oui.
qualité. Dans un contexte où tu te dis, ben, j'investis sur l'accessibilité, puis la qualité, je vais finir par arriver.
Oui.
Moi, je poserais la question, tantôt, on va savoir, bref, es-tu d'accord avec ça?
Oui, ça regarde ce que j'appelle, tu sais, aussi,
Parce que, tu sais, si on
pour les
choisit
enfants
accessibilité,
vulnérables, c'est encore les enfants.
c'est ça,
Ouais.
exact.
Tout à fait.
Donc, tu sais, à un moment donné, c'est ça.
Ben, c'est sûr que, parce que je te l'ai dit, attends,
Tu mourrais, ben oui, mais c'est ça.
un peu vite.
Oui, fait que dans ce sens-là,
Ouais,
C'est
c'est
noyé, tu sais.
tu me donnes pas le choix, fait que je vais te répondre.
Je sais pas, mais
Mais en fait, j'avais dit dans mon
Oui.
libellé, ça peut être aussi un gros choix. Tu sais, il faut décider que c'en est pas un, puis qu'on fait les deux.
oui.
tu sais.
Non, mais tu vois, quand
L'autre chose qu'elle dit aussi, c'est que quelque part dans une de ses lignes, elle dit qu'on devrait exiger, puisque votre réseau existe déjà, puisqu'elle a parlé de gratuité, on devrait au moins exiger,
Un retour au service.
non mais les critères de qualité, les exigences devraient être les mêmes.
Ouais, partout.
Tu sais, ce que tu exiges au CPE, tu devrais avoir la même exigence. Fait que si on élargissait ça au réseau actuel, autant aux familles, tu sais, non,
ils sont gouvernés par la même loi.
mais non, il n'existe pas la
Il y a pas
qualification
même
du personnel, il n'y a pas les éléments de programme. Oui,
Privé, non, ils ont
oui.
pas de-
Et Martine, écoute.
J'écoute.
Elle dit, il y a, dans le moment de l'éphémère,
Oui.
il semble y avoir des négociations par exemple, entre le gouvernement fédéral et ici. Là, je n'ai pas compris ce qu'elle dit.
Les différentes provinces, en fait.
Au sujet de quoi?
D'une politique globale d'éducation à la petite enfance.
C'est un cadre fédéral pour les
Elle
Ça, c'est
a
qui est
mise
responsable
là-dessus.
de ça, c'est Jeanne.
Oui, elle a parlé de ce ministre-là et de l'autre ministre,
Caroline Bennett.
Caroline Bennett.
Ça veut dire qu'il n'avait pas encore commencé.
Mais ils n'ont rien publié.
C'est ça.
L'autre, qui
Parce que le silence, ouais, il y a des
c'est parce que la ligne que Phil a défendue
Ouais.
c'est la ligne des économies sociales.
Ce que tu as dit, là.
Et Duclos, qui fait partie de cette ligne-là, les deux sont contents.
Ouais.
Que le numérique. C'est eux qui pour avoir une approche pas confrontationnelle et respectueusement
La diplomatie.
Philippe,
Oui, alors,
c'est prêt? OK. On est prêt?
on est prêt? Oui, on est prêt.
F majuscule 25 à 35.
Tu veux prendre un
Bon, attends, moi, je vais retrouver le texte de...
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning, Gordon Cleveland.
Good morning. Let's see. I think my video is off.
Yeah, because we hear you very well. Okay, now we can see you as well.
Okay, thank you.
Can you also hear us nicely?
Yes.
Yes?
I can hear you very well.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We are very happy to have you with us this morning. This is the Commission on Early Childhood Education in Quebec. The Commission mandate is to assess the situation of early childhood education in Quebec at the moment and to provide recommendations in terms of public policy to forging a collective future for early childhood education. So I'm going to introduce you to the Commission members that are sitting by me. I'm Mallory Flon. We spoke over the phone. I work for Institut du Nouveau Monde. The Commission chair is André Lebon. Martine Desjardins et Monsieur Pierre Landry. So their mandate is to ensure the independence and of this process, to make sure that it is non-partisan. It's an initiative of the Association québécoise des centres de la petite enfance, but they gave the mandate of independence to the Commission members, and they also asked us, the Institut du Nouveau Monde, to guarantee the neutrality of facilitation to make sure that the diversity of participation methods were mobilized to make sure that all Quebec citizen groups and experts could contribute to the Commission activities. So the objective of this particular activity, the public hearing of experts, the aim is to provide Commission members with complete and recent research results regarding early childhood education, and also in the lead up to their cross-Quebec consultation tour, because they will be visiting 14 Quebec cities in the next 2 months. So this is how it's going to work. You have a 15-minute presentation that will be followed by a 15-minute question and answer. If the Commission members don't use up the entire time with questions, we will go in the audience here and allow them to also ask questions. I remind you that some people are listening to us online. If the technology fails us, we will try calling you back first on Skype, and if some problem, by phone.
Okay.
So here we go.
Okay. So I want to turn to put the slides on the screen.
Oh yeah, we have. So you know how to do that. There's the plus.
I will try. Yes.
Sign.
Share screen. Share your entire screen. Start. Let's see.
Getting closer. There we go.
Okay, you can see it now?
Can
you see?
Not yet. It's at the moment the screen is black.
That's unfortunate.
There we go. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
We can both see, hear, and also see the presentation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this very important exercise. I was trying to think what would be of use from what work I have done. And so I've done some work on things related to Quebec and Quebec childcare. It's my research interest for many years now. The main research interest as an economist in the Department of Management is work on the economics of early childhood education. And so this is what I'm going to try and present. Is everything okay with the sound?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is trying to help you work towards a balance sheet of Quebec childcare. And I'm going to talk about four things very briefly, obviously. The affordability of licensed childcare in Quebec, but also compared to the rest of Canada. Access issues to licensed childcare in Quebec and versus the rest of Canada. Some work I did on quality and centre de la petite enfance. And then some comments for you on some very prominent analysis by economists on Quebec childcare and my interpretation of their findings. So this diagram, it would take me some time to fully explain it, but it's an attempt to measure the affordability of childcare in what it says at the top, ROC, rest of Canada. So these are couple families, two-parent families, and we've developed a measure, a straightforward measure, the percentage that childcare costs are of the net family income, the after-tax and after-benefits family income. And so what this does, and it does it based on a sample survey, so these are blown up to population estimates. These are population estimates of the affordability of childcare in the rest of Canada. And I'll draw your attention to the number 10 on the bottom axis. A lot of people say that 10% of family income, really the price has to be less than that for childcare to be affordable. And so this is licensed childcare. As you can see, looking at the number 10 on the bottom axis, only about maybe 30, a little over 30% of families, two-parent families in rest of Canada, could you say that childcare is affordable, that it would cost less than 10% of the net family income of those families? Which means that about for 70% of families, licensed childcare is unaffordable in the rest of Canada. Now, what's interesting is to move on and think about Quebec, because this is a diagram for Quebec. This is 2010, 2011, so it's different than the current situation a little bit, but nonetheless fairly close. And as you can see, the vast majority of two-parent families, couple families in Quebec, would pay less than 5% of their net family income in the cost of childcare, and some percentage would pay up to 10%, but a very, very different situation than in the rest of Canada. If we take lone parent families in Quebec, there are a few more issues. There are some families paying over 10% of their family income in childcare costs, but still the vast majority, much better situation than in the rest of Canada. And so, conclusion, again, trying to draw a balance sheet here, Quebec's childcare reforms have dramatically improved the affordability compared to the rest of Canada. It's important to remember that, and it's important to work to maintain these improvements. Much of the work that I've done and that others have done, there's actually a recent report on the City of Toronto Children's Services website, which appeared today. But it assesses that parents are very, very sensitive to price. It definitely affects behavior, both employment behavior and decisions about the kind of child care that they'll use. So maintaining that affordability is incredibly important. Now, in comparison, we look in envy at Quebec from English Canada. Affordability is getting steadily worse in the rest of Canada. Prices are rising twice as fast as inflation over the last 10 to 15 years. And here are the average annual fees in Toronto in 2015. Infant care, $21,000 a year. Toddler care, $17,000. For preschool-age children, $13,000, and kindergarten before and after school around $7,000. So the situation in Quebec is very much better than in the rest of Canada, and it is important to preserve that. Okay, this is a chart which, again, it's difficult to look at very quickly. So I'll draw your attention only to the 4 bars on the left, which say high school or less underneath them. And this is a chart which looks at the percentage of children using licensed childcare according to the education of the mother. So those bars on the left are for mothers who have a high school education or less. This is data from 2010, 2011, Statistics Canada data, the survey of young Canadians. And it's for children 1 to 5 years of age, so not 0 years of age, but not less than 1, but only 1 to 5 years of age. And what you see on the bars on the left-hand side, again, shows how radical the difference is in between Quebec and the rest of Canada, but also shows that even though you have important access issues, so even though it's true that high school educated mothers have less access to licensed care than do the other bars on the right-hand side, which are college educated or university educated, nonetheless, the differences are less in Quebec. There are very important acquisitions of the child care reforms of the late 1990s. And again, it's important to preserve and extend those. So just looking briefly at the columns on the left-hand side, the first one, the very first one on the left, shows all mothers in the rest of Canada who have a high school education or less. And you can see only 15% of them end up using licensed care, which is a big surprise because we have subsidy systems in the rest of Canada that are supposed to encourage relatively low-income families into using licensed care, but it's not very effective. The next bar shows that of the mothers in the rest of Canada that have a high school education and are currently employed, about 25% of them use licensed care. The next 2 bars are Quebec, and that shows that for all high school educated mothers in Quebec, over 40% of them are using licensed care. And then if you take all mothers who have a high school education and are currently employed, actually I believe that's currently employed or studying, it's over 60% are using licensed care. So again, the situation, I mean, this chart shows 2 things. It shows the problem. There are differences in between families with a high school education and those with more education. So there are problems of access. But on the other hand, there have been very big improvements in Quebec relative to the rest of Canada. So I'm trying to provide some material for you to help to form a balance sheet. So here are the conclusions. I've mostly put these together already. The final bullet at the bottom says Quebec's childcare reforms had particularly strong effects encouraging mothers with low levels of education into the workforce. That's a conclusion from Lefebvre and Merrigan from UQAM, a couple of different studies that they did, very long-lasting, strong effects, particularly on mothers with high school education or less. So a mixed picture. 2 more things in the very short time that I have available. One, some research that Nathalie Bicra and I did on the Grandir en Qualité data set from 2003. The message here strongly is that CPEs have very much better quality. It did at that time have very much better quality than other garderies. This looked at the center-based care. And so on average, the difference, if you turned it into a percentage, this is at the bottom of the first point, was 64.7% a quality rating for CPEs and only 52.9% for garderies. We analyzed the determinants of quality in child care centers, put the garderies and the CPEs into the same data set, and analyzed what factors appeared to determine quality in Quebec childcare. Being a CPE was enormously important, the biggest factor of all, even with all other factors held constant. But looking at the list in the third bullet point below, you can see that all of the things that we would expect to influence quality also had strong influence on quality. So, for instance, teacher education, very important. Professional development of teachers, very important. The education level of the director in the center, the professional development of the director in the center. So all of these factors and a bunch of others are important differences in between garderies and CPs, and also have big impacts on quality. And the final set of points that I want to make is to look at the literature coming from economists largely, and often quite negative about the impact of Quebec childcare on child development. So Michael Baker, I think you will be talking to him, Michael Baker, Gruber, and Milligan in 2008, and then the other articles I refer to here are Kotlenberg and Lehrer, a set of articles in 2013. And the first one, the Baker, Gruber, and Milligan article, it has certainly gotten a lot of press and a lot of interest, because it says that across a whole lot of a range of measures, the effects on child development of participation in early childhood education were either less positive in Quebec than in the rest of Canada, or perhaps negative in Quebec. But the point about that article really is that it didn't analyze the users of childcare versus the non-users. So the causes of any differences in between Quebec and Canadian children are unclear. Was it childcare? Was it participation in employment? Was it the changes in parental behavior? None of this is clear. The nice thing about the Kotlenberg and Lehrer articles is two things. One, that they looked more at users of childcare versus non-users of childcare, and secondly, that they found a range of different effects. So the basic message here is that the effects of childcare on children are very complicated, and you probably hear that from other researchers. But the evidence here from the Kotlenberg and Lehrer results is strong. Basically, they found that any negative effects were concentrated in new users of childcare in Quebec. So not the families who had already had their children in childcare, but the ones that were newly encouraged by the $5 a day policy. So it suggests that there were big changes in family activity, big changes in family organization going on when childcare became more affordable, and that it's the adjustment for that new situation that may have caused any differences in between Quebec and Canada in the child development in that period. Another finding they had was that the negative effects were concentrated in children who began childcare at a very young age. There was no evidence of negative effects on 3- and 4-year-olds, and good, strong evidence of positive effects for 3-year-olds. And again, a finding, this is out of one of the articles that I've referred to here, that any negative effects were concentrated in boys rather than girls. And a very interesting finding suggested by those researchers that there were important changes in parenting practices as they moved into formal childcare services. And the way they described it, they said that that parents were assuming that because this was educational childcare, that they no longer had the same responsibilities in terms of reading to their children. These sound like adjustment problems. They do remind us that the issue of the way in which parenting and early childhood education works together, that's a very important topic, and it's important for childcare to encourage good parenting as well. Okay, so if I move towards the end here, what we have a couple of points that are worth making. In the period studied by these authors, and this is true for Baker, Milligan, and Gruber, but also for the Kotlenberg and Lehrer pieces, in that period, only 31% of the increase in spaces was in CPEs. 69% of the increase in licensed childcare available in Quebec was in family daycare or for-profit childcare, and there seems to be good evidence that there's worse quality of services there. So if there have been negative effects in the past, or less positive than desirable, this is the place probably to look for improvements. And then the final point, which I've made before, which is that when assessing the impacts of early childhood education and care services on children, the details matter enormously. Both positive and negative effects are possible, and it depends very much on quality, but also on things like gender and on the impact of new programs on parenting behaviors. And that's it. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Cleveland.
Yes, I am going to try and get rid of this so that I can see you again.
Okay. It's going to give some time to the commission members to prepare the questions.
Yeah. Okay. Am I back now? Can you see me? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
We see you in a very small space.
Oh, only on the very small. Okay, let me see if I can.
No, but it could be okay. We see you. Oh, okay, now it's perfect.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, sir. It's very clear. And in your first slide, you show us that parents are sensible to affordability.
Yes.
Now we're changing in Quebec, actually. We're changing the way of supporting. We have crédit d'impôt for parents now. That makes the choice, I would say, slightly different, because it could be cheaper to send someone in a commercial daycare than going to CPE. And with the conclusion you have told us about quality in that kind of resources, what is your comment about these choices? Affordability could be or not, could bring us outside of the quality, if we look at it very simply.
Yes.
Can you comment that, please?
It is a source of anguish for many researchers, but it's true that parents are very sensitive to price and not sufficiently sensitive to quality. Quality rarely moves parents. Now, it does in a certain sense, like people will choose a center over a family home, and if you ask them, the reasons of quality will be important as part of that. But gradations of quality, if there's an improvement in quality in centers, parents may not notice it. It may be important, we may think it's very important, but they may not notice it. But they will very quickly and immediately notice a difference in price. And that's unfortunate, but it's true. And that means that when you're setting up policy, you have to be very, very careful about the price signals and what incentives those price signals provide. So if it's true what you say, that the price signals are providing incentives for the use of non-subsidized care, garderies that are not subsidized, or any poorer quality options, then this is a big problem.
In the event we need to make some choices, we're talking about full universality versus proportionate universality. What would be recommendable in your point of view?
If a reform, if an early childhood education reform does not serve the most vulnerable, it is not a good reform. So if it's true that movements towards universality mean that the most vulnerable continue to be disadvantaged, are not especially helped, then that is a big problem. So many people believe that proportionate universality is desirable precisely because it allows you to have universality and also well serve the most vulnerable. But it's not, it depends on the details. So I would say that it is a very important test of childcare reforms of any kind that they do serve the most vulnerable well. Whether you can do that within a fully universal system then depends on the details. But that is a very important criterion, a central criterion.
Well, actually, to go on the same issue, but on a different angle, when we look at the education system, we know that it's fully subsidized and that it's at cost zero for parents, aside from the material you have to purchase or whatever. But if we look at ECE, would you think that it should be the same reasoning that we apply to ECE as it is to education?
Whether it should be universal in the same sense as
yes,
education, you're saying?
Yes.
Yes, as an ultimate objective, for sure. That would be my ultimate objective, is to have it as free and available and as universal as the education system. In the rest of Canada, this is so far from where we are that often we don't talk in these terms. So some of the policies that make sense in English Canada are not so sensible in Quebec. So for us, a sliding scale policy, improving subsidization, even if it's on a sliding scale of income, if you dramatically expand subsidies in that way, this is a very positive thing for English Canada. To do that in Quebec means moving from a flat fee to a sliding scale. And in many ways, you might say that's a step backwards in terms of the accessibility and the availability of childcare. So what looks like the same reform actually has different implications in Quebec and the rest of Canada. So you can't take the research on, what's the effect of a sliding scale of fees around the world and apply it immediately to Quebec, because it's a question of where you're moving from and where you're moving to. There's lots of arguments that the flat fee in Quebec has been extraordinarily important, especially for the low-income families, because the charge is transparent. Our subsidy system in the rest of Canada is labyrinthian, difficult to understand. Nobody quite knows what charge they will actually pay at the end of the year. Because there's a work requirement, sometimes your work changes, then you get thrown out of subsidy, get put back in. So this has not very good effects in terms of encouraging low-educated and low-income mothers into the workforce in the rest of Canada. Okay, so, but the very transparent $5 a day, $7 a day flat fee, it's very easy to understand what the charge is. I know exactly how much I'm going to have to pay when it's $5 a day or $7 a day. So that transparency, I think, has been very important. And so if you lose that transparency, and it's for you to judge whether you're losing the transparency with the reforms that have now come about. But if you really begin to lose that transparency about how much it will cost me, then you lose a lot.
Okay. Yes, I have a question for you. It's about sometimes we hear around here that the rest of Canada is more sensible to the family responsibility about children, and that's why they ask for the money be given to the family or the parents and not to directly to the system. So when it comes to the choice, should the state provide, if they decide to support the public system on early childhood, should they provide the money to the system, to the resources, or should they provide the money by crédit d'impôt or anyway, family allowance or whatever, directly to the family? What is your opinion about that kind of challenge? And is it true that somewhere in the rest of Canada it has been an influence of their choice or no choice?
I mean, obviously, it's a somewhat complicated issue. I mean, I would say this refers back to the point that I made earlier, which is that parents are not particularly good judges of quality in many cases. They're very good judges of some things, right? So some things related to their own child and so on. But if you ask them to judge early childhood education quality, they won't necessarily judge it well. And so giving them the money and asking them to choose, they will be very much more affected by price than they are by quality, and that's a big problem, you know. So if quality is absolutely central to the experience of the children, then you say, I can't give a free choice. Now, I can step in as the government and ensure there are 3 or 4 different types of care, all of which are now guaranteed to be good quality. I can do that and now give parents choices in between those 3 or 4. That's okay. But to allow poor quality and good quality and now say you can have the money and choose whichever you like, I think we generally say that that's not really acceptable. The difficulty comes because certainly in the rest of Canada, a large number of families don't spend their money on early childhood education. There is, in the rest of Canada, a large number of families who look after their children on their own, even while the parents are working. Okay, this is actually a big phenomenon in the rest of Canada because of the affordability crisis, really, right? But it means that it's possible if you give the money directly to the childcare centers, you fund the system. Some people feel politically upset because they say, I now will not gain access to that money because I'm staying at home. So unless you make it affordable enough that I can go to childcare, if you're just providing a little bit of assistance, if you're just making it a little cheaper, then I will not gain by you providing assistance to the service. So that's where the problem comes in the rest of Canada and why there's more of a tendency to maybe fund the person, rather the family, rather than the. But you're in a different situation. You have funded already the majority of the costs, so it is affordable for the vast majority of parents. So I think you're in a different situation. You can, I think, relatively happily fund the service on the argument of keeping the quality good and making sure that parents are choosing only from things which are of acceptable quality.
Thank you, sir.
You compare a few of other researchers from other economists saying that they look into quality, saying that we have a poor quality system instead of the rest of Canada, for example. Is it because actually they look at the entire system instead of just the CPE as you look into with Grandir à Qualité and Nathalie Bira's group? Or is it because actually we focus more in Quebec on accessibility rather than quality, instead that the choice is different in the rest of Canada? Is it, in your opinion, what is happening and what they are looking into, or am I mistaken?
I can't speak for all researchers, but I would say that fairly knowledgeable researchers in the rest of Canada would say that the CPEs are of pretty good quality, but the family childcare and the for-profit childcare is definitely more problematic. You bear the legacy of the way in which the program came about. It came about very quickly. Why did it come about very quickly? For political reasons. Okay? If it hadn't come about very quickly, would the Charest government have reversed it? Yes, probably. But by the time that the Charest government came in, they couldn't reverse it. So the very quick implementation was probably important to the political success of the project, but those of us who are researchers would say it actually wasn't very good for the development of the system, right? You should develop the system more slowly. But I live in a world in which that politics doesn't exist. I recognize there are good political reasons maybe why you did things the way you did, but it created a legacy of problems. So one of the legacy of problems, and I don't know how much this is still true, but is that, well, first of all, of course, you relied on family daycare very much, with not very many insurances of quality on that. But it's also true that you made a lot of teachers, what we call this recognition of prior qualifications. Like many teachers who didn't really have the academic qualifications became fully qualified teachers because there was such a shortage, right? And that also meant that what you had was a whole bunch of teachers being brought into the system who were not as fully developed as they should be. And of course, then they're going to get paid more in this job than they could ever get in another job because their qualifications weren't that good. So they're going to stay around forever, right? So it does mean that you created problems for the system and quality problems for the system right from the beginning. They might have been unavoidable, but they still have affected the evolution of the system for sure. And so the quality agenda remains an extraordinarily important agenda for Quebec because of the legacy of the way in which it developed, I think.
Before moving to the public, I also have a clarification question while we're on quality. In one of your slides, you mentioned the age of youngest child in classroom being one of the indicators of quality. I wonder how that pans out. Can you just explain more this dimension?
What it was the, each classroom we had the age of the youngest child, and the age of the youngest child being higher meant quality was better. Okay. So it was harder to provide the good quality. These are all preschool age classrooms, so 18 months to 5 years of age. But the old, like if the youngest child was only 2 years of age, rather than 3 or 4 years of age, it was harder to produce quality, right? It was easier. All other things held constant. So some other things are changing. The child-staff ratio is also changing as you go. Actually, I don't remember how your child-staff ratios go in Quebec, but other things might be changing. But holding all those other factors constant, the older the age of the youngest child, the easier it was to produce quality.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to the audience. Any questions from the public? Yes. So one question from Mr. Pierre Fortin.
Gordon, I'm Pierre Fortin. I'm very happy that you're here. And my question is, you're quite aware that on average, economists in Canada who have looked at the Quebec experiment with childcare are mainly on the side of supporting a targeted system instead of a universal system. My question is simply, to name names, you have Milligan in UBC, Michael Baker, your approximately colleague colleague at the University of Toronto, and Pierre Lefebvre and Phil Merrigan in Montreal. How do you, when you're being asked this question, how do you deal with the nexus of deciding whether to embark on a universal or on a purely targeted system?
Right. I mean, the research for economists on child development is different than the research for other disciplines on child development. I mean, so it may surprise you, but economists do actually study child development. I mean, we've set our tentacles out into many, many different areas as economists. And so there are economists that study child development, but the techniques used are quite different. And they tend to be in larger data sets and not small groups of children, and looking at overall patterns as opposed to more detailed things with smaller groups of children. So the techniques are different, but the techniques in general have found a pretty wide range of different effects on children. And a lot of the American research, which has dominated the thinking of economists, has ended up saying, well, it's really, really good for, very low income, disadvantaged children, but we're not really sure about the rest, right? And so now a bunch of other research, which has been done in other countries, has been much more positive about broad child developmental effects. So research in France and in Norway and in some other countries. But still there's a wide pattern of effects that come out of that research. It's not universally clear that by having center-based education for kids, all of a sudden they become geniuses, or that they are much better prepared for school or whatever. But almost all studies find that the effects are stronger down the lower income end. So, that's led economists to come to these conclusions. I've looked at that research on child development and summarized it in a number of places, some of which are in your references. And I'm convinced that there are much broader impacts, but there is, it's a judgment call. It's not a slam dunk. And I get less comfortable the younger the child is. I don't think the evidence is very strong that if you send a child at less than 1 year of age into a child care center, that somehow or other it's going to dramatically impact them. For this argument now will depend much more on how it helps the parents rather than how much it helps the kids at less than 1 year of age. So at less than 1 year of age or 1 year of age, I'm not so sure it's very strong for the kids. From about 2 years of age up, I'm very convinced, and I'm very happy with the good quality early childhood education. But it is a judgment call, so maybe that's what differs with me from others.
One more question from the public. Please identify yourself before speaking. Thanks.
Yes, good morning. I'm Andréane Gagné from l'équipe de qualité Petite Enfance l'UQAM. It's a pleasure to meet you. We've never had a chance to meet. I would like to ask a follow-up question on the fact that parents are buyers of daycare services, and children are actually the consumers. It raises the fact that parents cannot judge the quality cannot judge the quality of the services provided. Now, if we look at the school system, where the cost is zero, where it's free, are parents more sensitive to the quality now that the question of money or the question of the charges are disappear? Are parents more sensitive to the quality? Are they more engaged in the quality of their schools? Or is my question clear?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I guess I would say parents are always concerned about quality, but they're not always good at judging it. So with the school system, we don't actually say, here's a few $1,000, go out and find yourself somebody to teach you, right? That's not what we do. We don't trust their ability to judge quality in that way, and not only to judge quality, but also to draw together the supply and organize that activity for themselves. But just as with schools, it's very important to have parental input. So the parental judgment of quality is extremely important in the schools, but we leave it at the level where parents really know what's happening. So if I'm talking about the interaction between this child's teacher and the child, the parent knows that. The parent talks to the kid at dinner. The parent, so if there's something about that relationship which is not working right, the parent's going to be much better at figuring that out than the state is. So that aspect of judging the quality, let's leave that to the parent and let's let them work that out. So a lot of aspects of quality, which are these smaller aspects, but very important aspects of quality, the parental input is important. But parents also would have that in the child care center too. Do they feel more or less powerful because it's zero priced? That's a question I don't think I know the answer to. But I mean, I want the parents to be very much involved at the level of the child care center too, and caring about quality and trying to cooperate in improving quality and to make sure that what's happening in the classroom works for their child. But I don't think that that's the same thing as saying, okay, parents can decide, everything about quality, whether this service versus that service is a good quality. That's a very difficult judgment for parents to make, and the state, I think, has to guarantee, an important level of quality for children.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Because I'm thinking of the next invite, which is Mr. Baker. I'm sorry. Mr. Cleveland, thank you very much for your time and presentation. We will make sure to keep you informed of our work and its results. So thanks again. You can continue listening to us online. So the next person will be Michael Baker. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Bye. Hello, Mr. Baker.
Yes.
Good morning. So we can hear you, but we can't see you at the moment.
Okay.
Maybe your video function is off.
So you'll just have to lead me through that. Where do I find my video function? Oh, I see it maybe at the bottom.
Yeah, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little sign, video sign. There we go.
Okay.
Hello, can you see us as well?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. So the sound is good. We can see and hear you nicely.
Okay.
So, Mr. Michael Baker, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Sure, you are professor at the University of Toronto. Here on the screen, you can see me and the commission members. My name is Mallory Flon. We spoke over the phone.
Right.
The mandate of this commission about early childhood education in Quebec, as a reminder, is to assess the situation regarding early education services. And the commission's members will make recommendations in terms of public policy to forge a collective vision for the future. It was an initiative of the Association québécoise des centres de la petite enfance, this commission, but the commission members were chosen for their independence and integrity, and the mandate of Institut du Nouveau Monde is also to guarantee the neutrality of facilitation of the commission activities, and to make sure that we hear a diversity of point of view from the citizen, researchers, experts such as yourself, and groups and organizations here in Quebec. The objective of this activity today, which we started yesterday, is to provide commission members with the most complete and recent and diverse points of view from research in the lead up to their consultation tour in Quebec, because they will be visiting 14 cities in the next 2 months. So this is how it's going to work. You have 15 minutes presentation, followed by 15 minutes question and answers from the commission members. If they don't use up the entire time, we'll turn to the audience and allow them to also ask you questions. You won't be able to see them, but you will be able to hear them.
Okay.
That's fine?
It's fine.
Okay. So, I forgot introducing them to you. The chair of the commission is André Lebon.
Morning.
Martine Desjardins and
Morning.
Pierre Landry. So we're happy to hear you out. In the bottom of your screen, you also have a sign to share your presentation. It's a little plus.
Okay.
If you click on
I
that,
see it. Yeah.
it allows you to share your presentation with us so that we can
Okay.
both see you and your presentation.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. I'm gonna cancel for a second. So I want to do the slideshow. So sorry. I'm sort of.
That's okay.
If I just a minute, let me. Okay.
Wonderful.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I can't see you anymore, but you can stop me when I've run out of time, perhaps.
That's fine. Yes, I will interrupt you.
Okay, well, again, thank you very much for inviting me to present to the Commission. Mostly what I'm going to talk about is research that I've completed with John Gruber, who's an economist at MIT, and Kevin Milligan, who's an economist at the University of British Columbia, and research that is related to that. So just to set the scene, as it were, though I'm sure you've seen data like this, because as you sat through many presentations on this, we know that a high proportion of women with children under 5 are currently working. This just shows you the data from 1990 through to about 2015 from the labor force survey, and that's the proportion of women with a child under 5 who are at work. And as you can see, we've graphed it both for Quebec and the rest of Canada. And over time, even in 1990, it was quite high at 45 or 50%, but now it's over 50%. Correspondingly, the proportion of children that are in non-parental care has risen. So this is a graph from the National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth, a survey performed by Stats Canada, which is no longer being conducted. It was conducted approximately between 1994 and 2008. So this shows you again for both the rest of Canada and for Quebec, the proportion of children between the ages of 0 and 4 who are in any form of non-parental care. And it's quite similar, obviously, in the two areas in the beginning of the survey, which is prior to the introduction of the Universal Childcare Program in Quebec, and then rises quite rapidly in Quebec relative to the rest of Canada after that program sort of is fully phased in. So a key question when a program like this, or like the Quebec program is established, is what is the impact on children? It's not the only question you might ask, of course. Programs like this have, at least what I understand, to have a number of objectives, including enabling women to enter the labor force and helping families to balance work and child raising. But there's also always the question of what impact does the program have on children? And traditionally, the way I think the academic literature has approached this is we want to understand both the short and long run impacts of a program. That is, initial impacts may eventually fade away, or they may persist well into adulthood. And so, of course, we do need to wait quite a while after a program is established to try to figure out the long-run impacts, but ideally that's what we like to do. Now, if social scientists ran the world, I guess, we'd do all these things by experiment. We'd be able to randomly assign some children to childcare, some children not, and then we would observe what happens or any differences in things that happen between the two groups. But in reality, we don't get to do that typically. And also typically, parents make a choice to put their child in care. It's not near to random. And then the problem that arises when we try to sort of evaluate what's happened is that the children in childcare may be systematically different from the ones that aren't. For example, they may be particularly high or low income. So what we do is, the best we can in this circumstances, is try to think of ways of addressing that problem and still trying to get what we think is good inference on what the impact of the program is. So if we take an overview of what we know from evaluations of various programs in the world, around the world, it seems that the message is sort of mixed. Okay. On one hand, high-quality interventions targeted to low-income children appear to have large benefits for their later life circumstances. But on the other hand, broader interventions that aren't targeted, that is, aren't specifically for children from, for example, from low-income households, they have effects that differ by time and place. And what I really mean by that is they sort of differ from study to study. Some universal programs in particular have either had no effect on children or, in fact, negative consequences for children. And some people take the very strong suggestion from that policymakers, therefore, should target the resources to providing high-quality childcare to low-income populations that have the biggest affordability problem. So, why do we think that high-quality interventions for low-income populations work? Primarily because those are the ones that actually have been evaluated using experiments. Perhaps the best known of those is the Perry Preschool project run in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where the children that participated in that experiment have now been followed well into adulthood. Okay, the findings of those studies that have evaluated that program found that intervention raised educational completion rates, especially for girls, reduced crime, especially for boys, and increased earnings. And the cost-benefit analysis of sort of the investment into the program relative to those benefits suggests large social returns. But it's also important to note that some large proportion of those social returns turn on the reduction in crime. Okay, that was part of the reason the program turned out to have large social returns. When we turn to universal childcare, the news is mixed. There's lots of evidence from a variety of developed nations for broad middle-class childcare interventions. Only some of them show positive benefits for children. And when we do find positive benefits, they're more likely for the children from low-income families. That is, these programs treat a broad spectrum of families, and we find that the benefits, when we do find them, are concentrated amongst the low-income families. The other thing that these evaluations tend to suggest is that these benefits can tend to fade out over time. That is, they don't persist with age. Some evaluations of some programs have turned up negative impacts, and as an example are the studies that I've done with John Gruber and Kevin Milligan of the Quebec program. However, there are other programs in the world that have all had similar results, and the research has not really uncovered yet the key reasons for the differences across programs. Elizabeth Cassio, in a more recent sort of overview of the inference or the evaluation of universal programs, suggests that maybe it has to do with the program's initial focus. Some programs seem to be set up with a specific preschool focus, that is an educational objective, while others have a more mixed mandate that includes childcare. And she suggests it's maybe that mixed mandate that is associated with these programs that have either no or negative impacts on children. So this is just a slide about the Quebec program, which of course you already know. Introduced in 1997. The biggest change in price was for middle and upper income class households. It did lead to a large expansion in the use of childcare. And so what we did with what we've done twice is try to evaluate this program by comparing what happened to cohorts of children for whom this program was available compared to earlier cohorts of children who weren't eligible for the program. And the way we do that is we sort of do a before and after comparison in Quebec, and then we use a before and after comparison in the rest of Canada as sort of a control group. If you're familiar with sort of the experimental structure, typically we randomly assign people to one group or the other, a treatment group or a control group. The idea here is that the Quebec children are the treatment group and the rest of Canada are the control group. The other characteristic of our evaluation method is an intent to treat methodology. And we're all very aware, I think, that when news of either of our studies made it to the press, this was perhaps the part of the study that was most criticized and I guess we would argue most misunderstood, but nevertheless most criticized. So the point of it is we include both treated and untreated people in both our samples, both the treatment sample and the control sample. What we mean by that is in our analysis samples, our children, both children that went to were in childcare and those that weren't. So this little diagram here on the screen shows you Quebec is our treatment group, rest of Canada is our control group, and before the colored faces are children in childcare, the white faces are children that are not, okay? And after we see that there are more children in childcare in Quebec, and we measure outcomes though amongst all those children, okay? And the reason we do that is not to obtain estimates that are biased by who actually takes up the childcare. And while this intent to treat methodology, as it's called, it's perhaps not as intuitive as an experimental methodology, it is very standard in economics and in some of the medical sciences. So what do we find? We find sizable negative effects on behavior measures for young children. That's our earliest study. So we looked at primarily non-cognitive outcomes. So what these are measures of aggression, anxiety, things like that. And we also had a measure of social motor tasks. And what we found was relative to the rest of Canada, children who were exposed to the program had higher values of these indices where a higher value meant a worse outcome. And so what we tried to do in the second study was follow up and ask, do these effects persist? And what we found was they do in different ways. So the first thing we did was ask, well, at a slightly older age, these earlier estimates were for children primarily under 5. okay, so for children before they enter school. So then we asked, do these effects persist to the ages at which the children will be in school? So that would be ages 5 to 9. And what we found was they did. So here's just 2 examples. This is an index of hyperactivity for ages 5 to 9. The horizontal axis are waves of the National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth. And we should have actually, now I realize, put years beside them, but roughly speaking, wave 1 and 2 are prior to the introduction of the child care program. Wave 3 is a transition year. Wave 4 and 5, the program is being sort of completely phased in. And then 6, 7, and 8, the program is fully going. And what you see there is initially the 2 indices are not unsimilar in Quebec and the rest of Canada, but then they deviate between the 2 areas as we get later in the survey. And we get a similar result for this index of anxiety. Okay, so again, the 2 indices are very similar in the 2 areas before the program is in place. And then as we move later and later, the two lines deviate. Now, what we did in this study was try to also look at some impacts on teens. That is, we were interested in finding out, okay, we have some results for non-cognitive behavior at ages, let's say 9 and under. What does this look like once these children are teenagers? And this is, as you know, obviously early days, because children exposed to the program are just now in their teenage years. So we looked at 3 different outcomes. One was a measure of test scores using data from, example, the PISA program. The second was measures of health that we used, we got from the national, the acronym escapes me at the moment, but anyway, from a national health survey StatsCan runs. And then third, the result that clearly has gotten the most publicity was we also looked at sort of teenage interactions with law enforcement. And what we found was that there was a systematic relationship with how much children were exposed to the new child care program and their crime rates. And we're talking teenage crime here. It's important to realize, you know, this is not adult crime. This is teenage crime. So these are things like minor theft, misdemeanors, and such. But nevertheless, that there was a systematic relationship between how much children of different cohorts were exposed to the program and their crime rates relative to their counterparts in the rest of Canada. So in this graph, what you see in brackets at the bottom beside each birth cohort is the number of years that cohort was actually in the child care program. And basically, the less that the cohort was exposed to the program, the lower their crime rates relative to the rest of Canada. So I guess the other point I'd like to make is these negative effects, not specifically, are not particularly everyone that we've looked at, but more generally have been found by other researchers. So Kotlenberg and Leur have a number of studies now, both looking at the persistence of the non-cognitive effects over time, and also differences in their magnitude based on how much children participated or what year they entered into the child care program, and also differences between boys and girls. Hike and al. Have a study looking at sort of longer-term impacts on cognitive outcomes. PPVT, they have a result there. And Brodeur and Connolly have a paper looking at impacts on family functioning and how parents get along. So sum up, because it's, I think, at least my last slide. I think the main message of our studies is it reinforces the message that early environment for reinforces the message that early environment for non-cognitive skill development is pivotal. It's very important. If we were looking for the surest bet based on the research, that would be to set up programs that provide high-quality childcare for the lowest income populations. The message from evaluations of universal childcare is it appears that it has to be done right. but we don't get a lot of strong guidance from research what right is. Some leads are, it's important, one, to know what a program replaces. That is, as children enter the program, what are they leaving? What are the alternatives? Because clearly how they're affected will depend on what sort of care and what sort of early educational or ECE they were receiving before the program came to place. The second thing is how it is used. That sort of questions primarily to do with duration. How long are the children in the actual care? And then finally, as Liz Cassio has pointed out, what is its quality and objectives? What was the initial intent of the program? Did it have an initial ECE focus? So our reading of the literature in this area is that existing universal programs may have no or negative effects on middle and upper income children. And as yet, we're not quite sure what is the key thing that makes, that leads to positive effects on those households. And that's what I have. I think after that, I just have references.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Baker, for your presentation. I will now turn to Commission members to ask their questions.
If you want to, can you look at us, or is it possible?
Yeah,
I will let you the time to put down the screen.
Here, so
of course.
I'll do my best here to try to return. I don't want to hang up on you, so is there
Okay, I'm gonna try to I think if you press escape, there you go. So if you go in Skype, you have the plus sign
there we go.
There we go. Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Actually, I asked the other conference and other expert actually to tell us about your findings, because you're saying there is negative effects, and yesterday we had a lot of experts saying that there is negative effects when the quality is not high enough, and you're saying the same thing, although you're saying it's all the system in Quebec that is not working. Do you have more refined findings saying that is one of the others type of childcare system, for example, CPE versus other system that is more effective? Or did you just look at the entire system and you don't have this specific information?
Right. Our estimates are for the entire system. So we don't have it parsed out by whether they're in a centaur or they're in a family-based care or something like that. Okay. No, exactly. Now, again, it's potentially problematic because parents, again, are going to make choices where they go, whether they go to a family-based care. So we have to be aware of that if we do try to take advantage of that there's an element of choice there.
Okay, and for instance, we ask also these questions. Do you think that the price that you pay make you choose a high quality system, or does the quality doesn't have an effect on the accessibility of the system?
Do I think that quality has a big impact?
Yeah.
You know, that is not in our research.
Okay.
I talk a lot with, with Mikkel Perlman. You're talking with her later today?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We will be talking with her
she's the
later.
person to ask about that.
Okay, but you don't have an opinion about accessibility versus quality and the impact for parents to choose whether...
I don't get that. I don't get the to use the expression. I don't see a smoking gun in the research that I've read as sort of the evaluations of universal programs. I don't think people have said this keeps turning up. This is important. So no, I wouldn't offer that as a.
Okay, thank you.
I wouldn't offer an opinion on that.
Okay.
Am I understanding you correctly that you would be more of the opinion that we should aim at targeted funding instead of universal funding?
If the objective, if there was a sort of a focus on the program should produce positive impacts on kids, I think that's where it's a dollar is most likely to have that impact, would be through the targeting. Sorry, go ahead. Okay, I just sort of say, programs often have multiple objectives. And so other objectives may take priority over the ones in this sphere of child development. And, if the program had neither positive or negative effects on children, you might say, well, it's having really positive effects on these other objectives. So on balance, we're okay. But if suddenly there is a priority on having a positive impact on children, I think the research says the surest way to get that is to target.
Okay, so I'm not sure I'm going to be clear, but I'll try to be clear. If I understand you correctly, the studies do not necessarily demonstrate that universality services has given quality to, let's say, mid-class and higher class income families. And so instead of spending that money there, we should focus more on lower income, where studies have demonstrated that there is an impact, which is positive. Am I summarizing you correctly or not?
I think that's correct. From the vantage of promoting child development, that I think is what the research tells us, that the targeting is what is the way to go.
Maybe just another question on that point. From the studies that we've and the experts that we've heard yesterday, I understand that vulnerability, which is because I understand the fact that the lowest income is because it's probably the most vulnerable children we're talking about. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about vulnerability, I understand that not necessarily all vulnerable children are within the lowest income families.
Right.
So, and even if we go look in, I'd say, absolute numbers instead of percentages, probably there are more vulnerable children in the mid-class families than there are in the lowest income. Now, would that targeting that you're talking about mean necessarily towards lowest income populations, or trying to define what is a vulnerable children?
Right. No, I am aware of that research that points out that there are measures of vulnerability that cut across income deciles. What I'd say response, if you look at, if you read my paper, the 2011 Universal Early Childhood Interventions, What is the Evidence Base? The first part of that study is sort of a review of the literature. And the second part of the study try to start sort of an examination of how children in different income deciles do over time. And one of the things that comes from that study is that income's a pretty good way of classifying things, that even children that are struggling in the top or middle income deciles, things tend to right themselves over time. One presumes partly through parental intervention. But children in the lower income deciles, things don't right themselves. So what I'm doing there is identifying children at risk in different income deciles by measures such as low scores in a variety of developmental indicators, and then looking at them when they're age 12 and say, what is the probability of persisting sort of in a vulnerable state? And it is very highly correlated with income. Those children that by sort of these measures at a young age find themselves in a vulnerable position in middle and upper income deciles, as I said, things are significantly better for them. They tend to right themselves. So I understand that argument that there are vulnerable children in multiple deciles, but I guess based on that examination, I would maintain that income's still a pretty good predictor if you really want to focus resources.
Okay, no further questions from the commission members in the audience. Apparently, yeah? Please identify yourself again before speaking.
Yes, good morning. Andran Gagné from University of Quebec in Montreal. I have a question regarding the slide you presented, the crime rate at teenagers' years.
Yeah.
I would like to know if you tried any other factor than the daycare attendance between the age of, the daycare attendance, because I can think of 25 other reasons that could explain the pattern you have. And I wonder if you've tried anything else. And if so, did you find the same pattern?
Right. Well, that's a graph of the raw data, if you would. In the actual regressions, what we take out, besides age and province, are controls for province fixed effects. So any fixed factors that you think are important across provinces, and also province time effects. So anything that you think is changing at the provincial level that might have an effect on this, we've also tried to account for. Now, if you have specific things that are observable and measurable, I'd be very happy to hear them.
Well, I can think of the age. I can think of school reform, law reform.
The law reform we do explicitly try to account for
across
in
Canada.
Again, passed in 2003. I just can't remember again the official name. We try to account that way two ways. One is we start the data in 2006 because a number of the studies of the initial introduction of that reform show that there was rather discrete change in crime rates following the reform in the rest of Canada, but after that, things settled out. The other way, if we think that the differential impact of that reform if you think that reform has differential impacts across provinces over time, that should be picked up by our province time effects.
Thank you for your answer. I think there was one more question. No? That's okay. Well, Mr. Baker, thanks for your time, for making time to prepare this presentation and being with us this morning. We'll keep you informed of our work, and that's it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Okay. Good luck with the rest of your investigation.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So this was our final invitee for this morning. Je peux parler français. Donc, c'était notre dernier invité pour ce matin. Nous allons donc prendre une pause pour le lunch. Notre prochaine invitée, c'est Madame Kitty Stewart, qui est professeure associée à London School of Economics. Sa présentation est prévue à 13h pile. Donc, nous allons arriver un peu d'avance pour pouvoir commencer à l'heure. Mon équipe et moi allons tester la technologie 15 minutes avant, donc à 13h moins quart. Alors, je vous inviterai tous à être là à 1h moins 10, disons, là, pour être sûr de rien manquer. Et nous aurons donc 3 présentations cet après-midi qui vont clôturer la séance d'audience publique d'experts. Alors, bon dîner à tous et on se retrouve donc à, disons, 1h moins 10. Merci.